everybody to this PhD Up webinar entitled The Literature Review's Structure. My name is Dana Shahal. I'm an academic skills advisor in the library and I will be presenting. Also with me today are Judy Maxwell.
Hello everybody.
And Michelle Madison.
Hi everyone.
And Judy and Michelle are also from the library and they will be helping me today. They're with me to monitor the chat function. So if you have any questions or you'd like to make comments throughout the webinar, please feel free to do so. And Judy and Michelle will do their best to answer these and comment. So the way you can use the chat box is you should see at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, there's a purple kind of arrow there. If you click on that, you should get these options at the bottom of your screen. The chat box is the one with the bubble right there. So you click on that and then you can click on this text box that says something in order to put your comments. So I assume that everybody's got their audio and video turned off, but it's just in case, please keep them turned off because we have a large volume of participants, so that'll just help us a little bit manage the webinar. Also, we will be recording this webinar. Are we doing that, Michelle?
Yes, Dana, I can confirm. I've just turned that on now.
Great. Okay, so we will be recording and this webinar, and we will share the recording with you along with the slides after we are done. So don't worry, everything is recorded and you'll get the slides as well. Okay, so we will, before that, we will also leave some time for questions afterwards. So if Judy or Michelle have missed anything during the chat, or if you have any further questions, we will leave time for that later on. Okay. So what
Dana, sorry, Dana. We've just had there's a couple of people who are having problems with their audio. One says it seems a little glitchy, so if you could speak a little slower, it might help. He asks. So
okay.
Thanks.
All right, I will try to switch off the video just in case this will help. So see if that helps a little bit. Will I still be able to? Can you still see
yes,
the slides?
Yes, we can now. Yep.
Okay, cool.
We could. You've got something else coming up.
Can you see the outline?
Yes, you're fine. Yes.
Okay, cool. And can you hear me a little bit better?
Yes, I believe it's okay.
Okay, cool. All right, so yeah, everybody, you'll have to bear with us with all this technology and internet connections and so on. But please do let us know if the audio is still not working. We'll see what happens. Okay, so for today's webinar, we're going to look at what is a literature review, and then we'll also talk about the literature review, where to place the literature review in terms of your thesis, and then within the literature review section itself, what is the internal structure of that literature review section, the introduction, body, and conclusion. And then we'll look at methods of organizing the body and capturing and synthesizing themes within the body. Okay. Okay, so what is a literature review? You might already have a bit of an idea about this. So, but after all, from the term literature review, this looks like it's a simple, a review of the literature. But actually, both the word literature and the word review can be misleading, deceptively misleading. So let's have a closer look by doing this next activity at what you might think a literature review does. So in this activity, as you'll be seeing from the screen, we've given you 9 statements about what literature reviews do. And I'd like you to take a minute to read these statements and think about whether you agree with these, so tick. If you don't agree with these, cross. Or if you are unsure, or you might think that this might depend on other factors, put an asterisk or a question mark next to it. So I'll just give you a minute to kind of go through this and think about it, and then we'll do it together. We'll go through the answers in groups as a whole group.
Dana,
Mm-hmm.
is it possible to move the
cursor.
bottom of the screen? Yeah, because I can't read question 9.
Yes. Okay, I'll try to do that. Bit annoying, isn't it?
Whoops.
Okay, so question 9, the statement number 9 says, neutrally, I can't even read it. So neutrally list and summarize pieces of relevant research.
Dana, your screen is now gone big. Your text is large, so we can only read down to question 5.
What? Oh.
Sorry.
Actually, it's Michelle here. I can see all of it still, so I'm not quite sure.
Oh, I can't. Sorry. Okay.
I'll try to do this again.
Must be me.
Can you see it, Judy?
I have to scroll down to read it all. Yeah, that's a bit strange. But nobody else seems to have the problem, so it must be me.
All right.
Yeah.
No problem. So let's have a look at this together now. So I will be skipping some statements because I'd like to have a closer look at what you thought. So I'll skip statement 1 for the time being. Literature reviews show you are aware of the important issues in your research. I hope everyone's got a tick against that, because that's exactly the function of a literature review. You need to show as a researcher that you're aware of the important issues surrounding your topic. I'll leave statement 3 as well. I'll go to statement 4. What do literature reviews do? They discuss work that is not specifically relevant but interesting. I hope you got a cross against that, even though at the beginning when you are reading, especially at the beginning, you read widely, you might find things that are really interesting. But as you actually write the literature review, especially towards the end when you've got a draft, it's really wise not to include literature that may have been interesting but is not relevant. Remember, you are doing a literature review for a purpose, and so if the piece of literature is not relevant, do not include it. Statement number 5, position your research in the context of what is known or not known in your area. That's absolutely right? So again, I hope you've got a tick there. One of the main purposes of a literature review is for you not only to display what are the important issues in your research area, but also to do so in order to contextualize, to position your research within the context of that literature. And as we'll see later, particularly in the context of what is known, but also what is not known. Statement number 6, only include publications from academic journals or books. Now I've got an asterisk next to that because this really depends on your discipline. So in some areas, it's only published academic journals or books that are accepted, but in other disciplines or areas of investigation, they might be emerging, they might be practical, and so on. Other types of literature may be acceptable as well. So have a look at what's common in your area of study. Ask your supervisor if you're not sure. Statement number 7, only include studies that agree with your hypothesis or argument. I hope you put a cross against that too, because the literature in the literature review is supposed to show the important issues. So these issues might not all be in agreement with each other. So you do not only include the studies that agree with your hypothesis or argument, you do need to show what other views there are, but again, ultimately where you stand within these. Statement number 8, identify gaps in the existing research. Yes, I hope you put a tick against that. We will talk about how this is an important step in order to contextualize your research. You're showing what the literature kind of generally agrees on. You're showing the debates, but you're also showing what is yet not known, and hopefully that provides the context and the rationale for your own research. And I'll leave statement 9 as well. So for those statements that I have left out, what we're going to do is try to find what you think more closely. So Judy is going to pull up a poll in a second that will, and so she will write these statements one by one, and we'd like you to say or click on whether you agree or disagree, yes or no. What do you think? And Judy will report back on each of these statements so we can have a discussion.
So the first statement is up now. You should all be able to see that. Is that true? Can everybody see? Great. Okay, I'm getting some yeses here. That's great. Well, it's not great if it's the answer. Okay.
Now, with this one, there is a trick. Notice the words a single and notice the word correct. So hopefully, actually, the answer to that is no, precisely because knowledge is contested and it changes all the time. So there can't be a single body of literature and it is not all in agreement. And actually, a major part of your literature review is to show that you are aware of these, precisely these debates. Who agrees with who? What are the points that they agree on? What are other points that are controversial? Some people agree, some people don't agree. So there isn't a single and a correct body of literature. There is how you stand, how you show that there are debates, and you will need to indicate where you stand within these. Next statement, please, Judy.
Yes, okay. Just coming up. Unfortunately, there's no really quick way to do this. Okay, so yes, no choice. Okay. Oh, sorry. Sorry, everybody. Oh, damn. Sorry. Right, here we go. Number 3 is coming up.
So do you need to include all of the relevant literature on your topic up until the time of submission? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Yes or no? What do you think?
Right, there we go. Sorry. So now have a go at that. Do you say yes? Do you say no? Lisa was saying, can we have a maybe?
Yes, you can.
You can have a maybe.
The poll is very do yes or no. But yes, hopefully with this statement, it's the tricky part is the word all. Do you include all the relevant literature? Not all, but you cannot possibly include every single piece of literature. Mainly because just like the literature is not single or is not correct, it is also not final. So there will always be something coming up and looking at, topics. And so the question is, okay, how do I, do I need to wait one day until my submission is still waiting on the latest, piece of, literature that might be relevant? Well, no, obviously this is not going to be practical. It is understood that your literature review will be within the, the limits, the time limits of your candidature. But importantly, one key way of handling this kind of, the constant kind of change in literature is how you can manage this issue is through having a clear scope for your literature review. If you can clearly state the scope of your literature review, hopefully this would at least limit, being explicitly clear about what the scope is, and kind of, not having to wait until the very last, piece of literature that may come up. Okay, and Judy, the final statement.
Right. Okay, this is statement number 9. And here it comes.
So do you need to neutrally list and summarize pieces of relevant research? What do you think? Let us know. Any answers coming through?
Yes, we've got some yeses. And Dean is saying neutral is in the eye of the beholder. True.
Yes.
Okay. Min has said we don't list, we summarize and synthesize. Excellent.
Great. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
Philippe says you have to take a position, which is really important.
Absolutely right. So exactly, you are not in the literature review. You are not just summarizing. Smith says this, Jones says that, blah blah says whatever. You are actually bringing together groups. You're synthesizing, as one of you said correctly, you're synthesizing a piece of information together, and you are trying to analyze critically what are the debates, as we've said, who agrees with who disagrees, what's the debate there. So you need to show critical analysis, and you also need to show, as you also pointed out, that you need where you stand within these debates. Your critical stance and your evaluation of this literature. So we will be talking. We have another webinar coming up entitled Literature Reviews Style, and this is where we're going to look at in much more detail how you can indicate critical review, a critical stance, and how can you critically analyze and review and evaluate the literature. So this is the answer key to this. And but just to summarize out of all this exercise, a literature review is then a critical analysis and evaluation of the scholarly works, the literature. So this could be published research, or this could not be, depending on your discipline, as we've said. So that's related to a particular area of research. Importantly, your literature review contextualizes your research project within the body of knowledge related to your topic, with all its debates, with all its controversies and issues. So, in other words, literature reviews sketch out the nature of the field or fields relevant to your inquiry. They identify major debates and define contentious terms. Importantly, in order to establish which studies, ideas, and/or methods are most pertinent to your study, locate the gaps in the field in order to create the warrant for the study in question, and identify the contribution that your own study will make. So now we come to the topic of structure. So we were going to look at where does your literature review fit within the structure of your thesis, and then we will look at how to structure the literature review section itself internally. So in terms of where the literature might fit in the context of your thesis, for every research project, this is what combines kind of, in a way, research projects of different kinds. There's a story, okay, and the literature review needs to fit in that story of your research. And the story typically goes that there may be some research questions out there or a research problem that you're interested in investigating. What we kind of know, or what the literature says in common about these questions or problems. This is what we still don't know. So this is precisely your literature review. And then the story goes on to show how you will address these questions or problems, and then show what are the answers that you found, or what are the arguments that you're making and developing, and what do these questions or arguments mean. So that's the general story. And this is where the literature review fits. So this kind of is common across different types of research projects. Now, in terms of the actual structure of your thesis and where the literature review fits, this really depends on precisely the structure of your thesis. Whether, for example, your thesis is traditional, what we call traditional, what we call complex, or what we call topic-based. So, for example, if you're doing a traditional thesis, basically a thesis that reports on a single study, then your literature review might actually be like a separate, usually chapter or two within the overall structure. So you've got introduction, usually that might have a little bit of a literature review, but then you might usually you have a separate chapter or two that precisely reports on or reviews the literature for that single study, and then the methods, results, and discussion. If you're doing a complex, what we call a complex traditional thesis, you're reporting on more than one study, for example, more than one experiment, and so on. So here you might have the general introduction to the overall thesis and a general literature review chapter for the whole thesis that kind of combines the different studies together. But also for each study, you might get so within each study, so within each chapter, for example, reporting on a particular experiment, study 1, for example, you will also have a section that reviews the specific literature for that specific study. If your thesis is a topic-based thesis, i.e. that it's organized according to themes, then the literature review might appear in each of those in each of your themes chapters, maybe also in the introduction. But for theme 1, you might review the literature for that theme. Theme 2, same thing, and so on and so forth. So really,
sorry, Dana, just before you go on, kind of represents the different types of thesis that RMIT does, depending on your topic and discipline. You could be doing a research by project, for instance, where you've got a lot of options about where the literature goes. But also, Dean was talking about a PhD by publication, and of course, the slide before that represents that. So each of those sections can be represent one of your particular studies that perhaps goes with the research by publication. It can be a bit confusing and a bit complex, but if you remember constantly, well, the one constant is that the literature always informs your research, but where the literature goes in your thesis varies depending on the types of thesis. And just very quickly, there will be a webinar coming on later in the PhD Up series that discusses the possible thesis structures, and we do talk about where the literature goes within those structures. So if you're interested in that, please sign up for that. Okay, sorry, Dana. Okay.
No, absolutely. Thanks for that, Judy. Absolutely. So yeah, please do have a look at the webinar. What's it called again, Judy?
It's a new one, and I've forgotten the name.
Right. I think
it's thesis planning, and it's to do with the structure.
Okay, cool.
There are two webinars planned. They're both repeated as well. The first one is around the structure. The second one is around developing an argument through the thesis. Okay, so if you're interested in those, please come, because the literature will be discussed in both of those, of course, because it's a really essential element of every thesis.
Absolutely. Thanks. Yeah, so absolutely. The idea is that the section you're going to call your literature review may not be one chapter. It might be 2 chapters or more. That same section that you call the literature review may not be a discrete chapter, an independent chapter. It could be distributed among other chapters, as in the thematically based thesis. So absolutely, it will depend on your thesis. It will depend on how the literature kind of fits within what you imagine to be the structure of your overall thesis. Okay, so now we move on to the internal structure of the literature review section. So whether it be an independent chapter or within a chapter, a section within that. And usually the broad structure of the literature review section, particularly if it's a chapter, goes like this. We have an introduction, body, and conclusion, but notice how it is it is structured according to like an upside down pyramid, if you like, so narrowing down the topic as we get to the conclusion. So usually we call this a map to gap structure, where at the beginning, in the introduction, you introduce the problem and context. So in a way, you are mapping the territory of your research topic. And then in the body, you increasingly narrow down and focus on the literature, highlighting the development of major concepts or influential studies or areas of agreement. And as you get closer to the gap or where your research fits, you're going to get more conceptually dense towards that. So you will focus on particular studies and in more detail until you identify kind of the gap or where your research might fit. And then finally, in the conclusion, you sum up and you link back. You sum up what you said about the literature and you link back to your own research topic or questions. Just a little note on the gap. The gap is very important. I mean, some people, we'd like to call it the case for your research. This is the warrant or the case for your research. You're forming an argument for why your research on your research questions and your research problem is needed in the first place. Okay, so now let's have a look at the first of these, the introduction section of the literature review. And what we're going to do is I'm going to show you a sample literature review introduction. I'll give you a couple of minutes to read through this, but I'd like you to, as you are reading, to think about, and if you've got a piece of paper, jot down some ideas of what makes this an effective introduction. What works for this introduction? Keep those ideas in mind, because after we're going to have reading time, we'll do a little whiteboard activity where you tell us what your ideas were about why this introduction might work. Okay, so first of all, here is the actual literature review introduction. We'll give you a couple of minutes to think about that, to read it and think about what makes it effective. So hopefully this has given you time to read the introduction. And now what I'm going to do is share with you a whiteboard. And in this whiteboard, I will like you to annotate this, or try to jot down your ideas. Why do you think this introduction may be effective? You can, to put your ideas down, you can click on that T in the blue that at the top of your icon, at the top of your screen, the T. You click on that, and then you click again on the whiteboard, and there should be a text that appears there, and you can put your answers there on the whiteboard. Is that kind of clear? I might just have to move some stuff so that they can be seen clearly. You can put as many answers as you like. There doesn't have to be a single answer. Great. Okay, some really good answers here. Absolutely. This is exactly some of the things that you have sort of looked at and written are absolutely what makes this introduction effective. I will just go back and to share my, I'll stop sharing the whiteboard now, and I'll go back to the presentation so we can summarize basically what you have said. So I'll share the webinar, the presentation again, and discuss the answers that you've given. So basically, absolutely, just like you have suggested yourselves, the introduction moves from general to specific. So in the blue there, it starts by giving the general context. It then goes increasingly more specifically to talk about the specific, identifies some more specific context. And you can see in green, for example, although the message is clear, it is also clear that we need to fully understand. So this is where the author identifies some general gaps in the problem or the topic. And then based on that, the author outlines the chapter in the blue there, and then with this outline, remind the reader of what the central focus of literature review is. And finally, it identifies the scope of the literature review by saying that the comparisons that will be made in terms of doctoral programs in Australia. So the scope is being limited to the Australian context, and so it's clear what the literature review will do and how it is limited in scope. So basically, yes, this is what an effective introduction to the literature review does. It situates your research within a general context in the literature. It then increasingly talks about the trends, the major trends, themes, areas of dissent or controversy, identifies the gaps in the literature, and then outlines the organisation of the body of the literature review and maybe indicates the scope. So now moving on to the body section of the literature review. Just by looking at this, if you got a literature review that looks like this one, where each paragraph summarizes a study, Jones, Yang, Smith, Davis, hopefully straight away you'll know that just by looking at it, that this is not really what you're supposed to do. Remember, the literature review is a critical evaluation of the literature. It means that it groups things together. It groups ideas or themes together. You need to analyze and show that you have analyzed what is going on in the literature, how you have grouped them, what studies you've grouped, and according to what, and so on. So these are some of the organization strategies, some strategies for how you review the literature in the body, how you can organize the huge amount of information that you'll find in the literature. The most common way of organizing the literature is according to themes or concepts. But you can also analyze the literature or organize the literature chronologically, so according to time frames, a development of a certain area, let's say. Topics, so these are the sort of big themes, if you like, so they're broader than smaller themes or concepts. You can organize your literature according to different theories, or you can organize your literature according to methodologies. So you need to know what, obviously you're the one that knows what your topic is about and so on, and how you're going to structure your thesis. And so you will need to decide which each of these organization methods have got definitely its advantages, but also some challenges. So you'll need to think about what is the best method or strategies for you. So just to give you examples of what a literature review that is organized by themes looks like, let's have a look at this. So the research topic is the role of information and communication technologies in knowledge management. And notice how the literature review is organized around the themes of the complexity of knowledge, knowledge management theory and practice, ICT in knowledge management, issues and concerns for effective knowledge management. Okay, and it starts with an intro and it finishes with a conclusion. So this is an example of a literature review that is organized according to themes. You can have a read of this more carefully in your own time and when you get the recording and the slides. We'll skip this for now, the activity, but we'll give you more examples of other types of organization. Can you guess by looking at this what kind of method of organization is being used here? Use a chat function if you like to answer this. Hopefully, just by looking at this, that we've got only basically two major topics, right? Because they're big, so they're not just themes, they're huge areas. So this is a way of, this is the topic organization kind of strategy. Now, one thing about the topic organization strategy you need to keep in mind is that because a topic can be so big, you still have to be very careful then that within that section, within that topic, how are you going to organize that topic? So you still need to think about internal organization within it. This is an example of a chronological organization. So literature review organized according to chronology. And you can clearly see this by looking at sort of historical context. So it starts off with looking at the constitutional setting, basic concepts. So here we've got some themes, but then it goes chronologically by talking about antecedents in English law, and then building regulation, settlement to federation. So it goes through different time frames. So this is chronological organization. Again, here this might be very useful in some contexts for some theses, but be careful also for the chronological organization not to be kind of like a descriptive year by year sort of summary of what happened, historically. So be careful that you don't fall into sort of just a description of historical kind of events. Your literature still needs to be critical and synthesizes information. This is an example of a literature review that's organized with, well, in the first chapter, you'll see, actually, this is an interesting example from an actual thesis. This thesis has two chapters of literature review. The first one is organized according to theories, so citizenship and welfare rights, market liberalism, new paternalism, etc. But then the second literature review chapter, chapter 3, organizes the literature into themes. So it's just it's a good example of showing you how a literature review can be organized in different ways. This is theories, and chapter 3 is themes. And finally, this is a literature review section or chapter that is organized according to methodologies. You can see you've got key qualitative research, key quantitative research, and meta-analysis. Okay, so now we move on to, okay, how can you capture and synthesize themes? If you wanted to use a themes way of organizing, that's the most common way of organizing literature review. How do you capture, practically speaking, and synthesize the themes together? Well, practically speaking, you can try to use a table like this one, where, for example, in the first column here, you can have the major themes that come up. For example, harmful substances, environmental dangers, prenatal healthcare, and so on. And then across the first row here, you have your various studies. And then, so for each of these studies, you can jot down which themes the studies has looked at. This will be helpful for later on, because once you sort of when you're writing your literature review, you can not only then summarize the identify the major themes, but also which studies, for example, look at harmful substances and what they say about it. So we know, for example, here, Jones, Langley, and White, they all talk about harmful substances. So you can group them together and discuss, what they say under that particular theme. So you can have more information about using a table or a matrix. Have a look at the Graduate Researcher Know-How website in your own time. So just Google RMIT Graduate Researcher Know-How if you don't know about this website before. And then in there, look for organizing ideas or using matrices. Now, another practical way of trying to, synthesize or sort of deal with all of the literature, which is obviously very the scope is can be absolutely overwhelming at times, is to use a mind map. So here, for example, this would be at the center is your topic: psychological and physiological effects of light and color on space users. And so for a topic, what are the major themes that come up? So for example, light, color, and emotion. And here you map the ideas, the themes that come up in the studies that look at light, color, and emotion. And you do the same, for example, for the theme of measuring emotion, the sub-themes that come up there in the studies, physiological measures, and so on and so forth. Okay. Now, so hopefully this gives you some practical tools with dealing with capturing the literature and the themes that come up. Now, let's have a quick look at, I'm going to show you 2 drafts of literature review paragraphs. They talk about, generally they are evaluating the usefulness of commercial diets. And I'd like you to think about whether you think that each of these drafts synthesizes different bodies of literature effectively, why or why not. And you can use the chat button, the chat box to give your answers if you like. So have a look at this draft. This shouldn't take too long. You shouldn't even sort of really look at it very carefully. Just by looking at it, do you think that this draft synthesizes the literature effectively? Hopefully, just by looking at it, you'll say no, because have a look. Again, each paragraph here starts with a single study, summarizes it, then goes to another study, summarizes it, another study summarizes it, and so on and so forth. So we know what each study says, but we have no clue how these studies are related together. What are the themes that bring them together? What are the themes that divide them out, or where they agree or disagree, or so on. So no, this is not a draft that's well synthesized. Let's have a look now at this one. I'll give you a minute to read it and to think about whether you think this is this effectively synthesizes the literature. And again, you can use the chat box to share your thoughts with us. And importantly, as you are reading, try to, whether you think this is an effective synthesis or not, ask yourself why. What makes it effective or not, effectively synthesized or not. Okay, so hopefully you have you've seen how hopefully this draft actually does synthesize the literature. How does it do so though? Notice one of the first things it does is that it clearly states the author analyzes the different literatures that are cited here, but the author groups them according to what's the major point or the major theme that's being made. In the first paragraph, the author groups the research that's investigating the effects of commercial diets and how these present serious health risks. So all of the examples that are found in this paragraph of the literature, they are examples, the author has grouped them together because they present examples of literature that show that the commercial diets present serious health risks. Okay, so they group and organize those literature reviews according to this major point, the major point that is being made, the major point that the author has found by critically analyzing the literature. Okay, in the second paragraph, same thing. So we've got a topic sentence that puts forth what the point of this paragraph is. In other words, what has the author analyzed to be a key point in the literature regarding the effects of commercial diets? And this point is about to say that these diets are ineffective. And you notice that the author groups Kern 2005 and Blodgett in the way they show, these studies show how these commercial diets are ineffective. Notice also that another way is that how the kind of two paragraphs are linked together. This little, in addition to these health risks, this is a little link, if you like, that links the first paragraph with the second. So it shows overall coherence and overall synthesis of ideas. Any comments here? Let us know. Finally, we move now to the conclusion. And so the conclusion of a literature review chapter or section, usually here you summarize the major themes or the issues that you've identified in the literature. So that's kind of the a general summary of the major themes. You point out then what the gaps or the inconsistencies or the things or the issues that we still don't know about, and then again you relate those back, the gaps and all the inconsistencies back to your own research question or problem as a way of contextualizing and contextualizing your research and saying why it's important to look at this your research topic or research questions in the first place. Okay, so this is an example of a conclusion that does that. I've taken out some bits because we can't fit them in one slide, but notice in the green here we've got a summary of the major things, the issues that have been found in the literature. Then in light blue, the author identifies gaps. So previous caching techniques have focused on the caching inverse lists, that have not considered other data structures. So we assume that this research, the research is about other data structures, and so on and so forth. And then in the conclusion, the author relates the gaps and issues back to their own research. So in subsequent chapters, we build upon the background work presented in this chapter. We examine and blah, blah, blah in more detail. So that brings us to the end of our webinar. Thank you for joining us. If you have the next couple of minutes, if you're available in the next couple of minutes, please give us your evaluation and what you think. You can simply open up a browser and just type bit.ly/review structure, and you can do this at right now if you like, but we will send you this link also afterwards with the presentation, with the recording and the presentation slides. And we will stay here, Judy, myself and I, for any questions for the next 5 minutes or so. So please feel free to use the chat box for any questions.
Yes, thank you. Thanks everybody for engaging. I wasn't able to sort of butt in, Dana, because I was so busy typing responses to all the questions and comments.
Yes.
But thanks everybody for doing that. It's great. Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
Virtually.
Yeah, if there are some questions that you that have been missed and you really you'd like to find out about, you can use the next few minutes to do that. And if that still hasn't been answered, and you can feel free to email myself or Judy for answers as well. I should probably have written my email address, but if you just search in the on the RMIT website, it should be dana.chahal, that's CHAHAL @rmit.edu.au.
Dana, Philippe's got a question. How
Yes.
long it takes us to do our literature review? And is it necessary to publish it? Which is an interesting question.
Yeah. Sorry, Michelle, can you say that again? It cut out a little bit.
Oh, sorry. How long should it take to do the literature review? And the second part of the question is it necessary to try to publish it?
Look, this is kind of, I mean, we can't really say how much it should take to do a literature review. A literature review is a process, and you go through it, and there's not kind of a linear way. Like, you don't just you read the literature, you write the literature review, it's over. And that's because usually what happens is, as you're going through the process of your research, you might find some interesting issues that came up either in your results or something, or your methodology or something that might get you back to looking at the literature. And sometimes our own research questions might kind of change slightly depending on what happens with our research investigation. So really, the literature review is usually important, particularly at the beginning, but also throughout, because the research process itself is not linear. It doesn't go step by step, that's it, over, done. It changes, and as a result, you might want to have a look at go back to the literature. Sometimes a piece of research that you have looked at the beginning may not be so relevant, but then you might decide later on, oh, actually, this is really relevant. So you go back to it, and and look
there
at it in more detail.
There was a question too at a little further back, Dana, and again, I'm sure there's no definite answer, but about the length of the literature review.
Yes. I think I gave a bit of an answer in the chat to that. It varies widely. It really depends on the amount of literature that you need to talk about in order to give your research the warrant. In some cases, for instance, in engineering students, if they're developing a model, there may be very, very little literature available. And in some cases, that literature review chapter actually isn't a chapter, it just becomes a section of the introduction to the whole thesis. But if you're doing other areas, studying in other areas, such as social science, for instance, you can do a large, huge literature review. More than 20,000 words can be literature review. So
Yeah.
it depends partly on discipline, but also partly on the amount of research that's directly related to your research that you need to talk about to give the whole picture of the research situated around your research.
That's right, Judy. And also, sorry.
Sorry. We've got another question just quickly from Belinda. Can I organise my literature review around theories and empirical studies where the theories will be organised separately and the empirical one also organised separately? So she must be looking at 2 sections or something.
Yeah, that's right. So just like the sample chapter where it has one chapter on theories and another chapter organized according to themes, that could happen. And within, or if it's I'm not sure if Belinda's speaking about a single chapter, but then if it's a single chapter, you have your theories, so the general theoretical approach, and then more kind of empirical studies. That's also a logical way of organizing your literature review.
And there's another from Emily, can you weave the literature review through your thesis, in the case of creative writing, creative practice, PhD, and this definitely you can. This is often the case with thematically based chapters in a thesis. You don't necessarily have one chapter of literature review, but the literature goes throughout those thematically based chapters. So that is definitely not only possible, but it's usual in creative practice PhDs.
That's right.
One more from Lisa. Is that okay to keep asking? Or
yeah, sure.
Okay. Lisa's got a. Can you have a separate chapter on conceptual theoretical framework?
Yes, most definitely.
Absolutely.
Yes, that would be a definite yes. Absolutely. If the conceptual or theoretical framework is incredibly important to your research and perhaps a little bit unexpected, most definitely a separate chapter is warranted for that.
I mean, the important thing with these questions is that thinking about, there's such variety in theses, and what we've given you here are 3 major structures. But the important thing is to think about, the purpose of what you're doing, okay, and how the literature review fits. I mean, does it function in terms of the purposes that it's supposed to do, but also does it fit the overall story of your thesis, right? So that's the kind of thing, the broader questions you need to ask yourself for these kinds of issues.
Yep, absolutely. Great.
I think that's all the questions that have come through just in the last few minutes.
Great. Well, thank you very much, everybody. We might leave it there. And again, if you've got further questions, there will be a repeat of this webinar next week, but there's also coming up a series of webinars concerning your research writing. There's, as I said before, literature review styles. So this is where we look at more closely about, we look at the critical analysis and evaluation and showing a critical stance or a voice in your literature review. And there are other things like writing with authority and editing your thesis and so on, plus also the kind of thesis structure and argument that webinars that Judy has mentioned already. So thank you very much for joining us. Please let us know what you think through the feedback. We will send you the recording and the presentation slides and the evaluation link within the next few days. Thanks again.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. Bye.